not every legend nails the landing. In the 1970s, some of rock's biggest names took wild swings, label pressure, disco fever, ill-timed experiments, and paid for it on the charts and in the reviews. Tonight, we're counting down the top 15 1970s rock misfires you forgot. Fact-checked. One pick per artist, no repeats. These aren't cheap shots. They're the risky pivots, flops, and left turns that show how fragile a great career can be. Stay for number 14, where a hard rock giant tries a reggae wink and splits the fan base. At number 12, a California institution stretches an old tune into an 11-minute disco detour. Number 11, a brass rock powerhouse chases the dance floor before hip-hop samples rescue the groove years later. At number 4, feedback becomes the whole album. Number 2 is a superstar's straight-up disco LP. And number 1, the so-called disco dead moment that became a scene staple anyway. By the end, you'll know why these mistakes happened and what they secretly got right. Question for you, which misfire do you secretly defend and which one still makes you hit skip? Drop your pick and let's roll 15 to 1.
They crammed me back into the
This wasn't the prophet on the mountaintop. It was Dylan stepping off the pedestal and walking into town in a disguise. After the 60s run, fans expected fire and vision. Instead, they got a double LP of covers, croons, and detours, stitched with a few live cuts and new songs that felt almost tossed off. The singing is mannered. The arrangements lean toward easy listening, and the track choices feel intentionally ordinary, like he's testing how much Bob Dylan is the myth versus the man. On release, critics pounced. The famous "What is this?" reaction stuck for years.
The judge had the papers in his right hand. 41 days.
But listen closely. You hear a star undercutting expectations, exploring comfort after a decade of heat. Misfire? As a statement to a hungry audience, yes. As a pivot away from being a spokesman, it's fascinating. Do you hear self-portrait as Dylan hiding, or reclaiming the right to be casual after changing the world?
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow. You're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
A pun in the title, a reggae sway in the groove, and a band best known for thunder trying on a grin. Dear Mak'er was Zeppelin's cheeky experiment, a doo-wop reggae hybrid with hand claps, a springy bass, and Robert Plant's playful yelps.
I love you.
Some fans loved the curveball. Others heard it as a novelty that didn't fit the band's myth. Even inside Zepp, there wasn't total consensus on the feel. On US radio, though, the thing stuck, proof that the band's swing could charm as well as crush. It's a misfire in the sense that it split the room and dated quickly next to their elemental blues and epics. But it also showed you how loose they could be, how much humor hid inside the heaviness. When it comes on, do you smile at the bounce or skip it to get back to the riffs and storm? Before Miss You made disco stones inevitable, Hot Stuff was the wobble on the way there. The band leans into a humid, mid-tempo funk, guitars scratching, clavinet and keys bubbling, the rhythm section rolling behind the beat. Jagger half sings, half teases, as if he's testing whether the floor will fill. It didn't land hard on the charts, and critics chalked it up as a trend chase, but the take is revealing. The Stones learning how to grease the groove without losing their slouch. You can hear Billy Preston color in the corners, and you can hear the lesson they'll perfect a couple of years later, how to make the club feel like a Stones room. Do you hear Hot Stuff as a wrong turn, or a rough draft for the disco rock masterpiece to come? Once a 2.5-minute soul pop tune from the Wild Honey era, now blown out into a 10-minute mirror ball marathon. Thumping 4 on the floor, strings, synth flashes, breakdowns, the whole late 70s toolkit. On paper, it's a savvy move. Adapt a strong melody for the dance floor and chase radio that had moved on. In practice, the remake asked a lot of listeners who came for harmonies, sunshine, and compact songcraft. The single edit charted but didn't change the narrative. The extended version became a curiosity fans still argue about. What's compelling is the sincerity. They aren't winking. They really try to meet the moment, even if the suit doesn't fit quite right. If you could only keep one version forever, the 1967 soul pop cut or the 1979 disco overhaul, which plays in your house? Horn band meets dance floor in a long, slick city groove. Co-written by Chicago's drummer with a funk soul ringer, Street Player arrives with congas, hi-hats, synth stabs, and brass that punch in tight patterns. The hook is there, but the vibe is club first, chorus second. A tough sell to rock radio expecting power ballads and tidy singles. On release, it underperformed, and the parent album wore the backlash. Then time flipped the verdict. Producers sampled those horn hits and percussion in the 90s, turning the track into a secret backbone of dance music. Misfire on day one, source code a decade later. That's the weird life of records that are too early, too hybrid, or just out of place. When you spin Street Player, do you hear late 70s overreach or the raw materials of future club classics? A classic girl group ballad turned into a mirror for a band in trouble. Aerosmith's cover of the Shangri-La's 1964 hit lands near the end of the 70s, when the group is drifting. Drug burnout, money stress, friendships fraying. Listen to the track. It's heavy and humid, the guitars pulling long shadows across a simple melody. Steven Tyler leans into the drama, selling heartbreak with grit, but you can feel the room behind him, tense, unsure. Joe Perry exits the band during the wider album sessions, and that turbulence sits in the mix. On paper, this should have been a radio layup. Famous melody, famous voice. On the chart, it barely moves. The single sounds like a band trying to remember who they were while covering a song about remembering. That's why it stings. When you hear this, do you think underrated power move or good singer, wrong timing?
You tried. It's a trick to make you see why.
A beautiful song that almost nobody heard, at least not the first time. Bowie issues The Prettiest Star as a standalone single before he becomes Bowie. Mark Bolan plays the elegant, flamenco-tinged guitar figure. The arrangement is all candlelight and charm, but the world isn't ready, and the record sinks with only a few hundred sales. It's a misfire not because the tune is weak, but because the story isn't there yet. No Ziggy, no myth, no audience prepared to lean in. Bowie files the melody away, reshapes it, and 2 years later revives it on Aladdin Sane with a sharper edge.
To sing a song of when I loved.
In hindsight, the 1970 single is a sketch for a future self. The pop crooner he briefly was, the glam icon he was about to be. Do you prefer the gentle, early single with Bolan's guitar, or the later, glossier remake that finally finds its stride? A legendary name meets a record that doesn't sound like the band thinks it does. Through a mix of schedule pressure and studio choices, strings and choir parts are overdubbed when the group isn't around, sweetening that clashes with the Byrds' bone-deep sound. Jangle, space, voices in open air.
Last time he was home, he held her on his knee.
What you get is a tug-of-war between California Sky and Lounge Varnish. The songwriting isn't empty. There are glimpses of the band's old reach, but the mood is wrong for them. Critics hear the mismatch, fans drift. The album underperforms and becomes a symbol of a great brand running on fumes. The lesson is simple. Production can either frame a band or hide it. Here, it hides it. If you could remix Birdmaniacs, would you strip the strings back to the wood and wire, or keep some of the sheen and try to make the contrast work? This video is sponsored by the Lore Store on Amazon, your one-stop shop for music lovers across reggae, rock, pop, and hip-hop. We built it for real listeners who don't want to dig through 1,000 listings to find the right gear. Inside the Lore Store, you'll find 5 aisles. VIP, top, battle-tested essentials. Headphones, turntables, speakers, gig-safe earplugs, smart speakers. Reggae vibe, roots and lovers. Rock made easy, automatic decks, warm bookshelf speakers, vinyl care. Rock lore, classic rock must-haves, open back cans, simple amps, living room concert vibes. Pop lore, feel-good everyday setups, clean, clear speakers, easy streaming, nostalgia-friendly picks. Hip-hop must-haves, punchy bass without the muddle, closed-back headphones and living room systems that handle low-end, plus a rotating crate of old album vinyl if you're rebuilding a 60s-90s collection. Every product page tells you who it's for, 3 pros, 1 con, and why we picked it. So you can choose with confidence. Flying soon? Check. VIP for noise canceling that tames plane roar. Mostly listening at home? Try open-back headphones that let live albums breathe. Want instant gratification vinyl? Our fully automatic turntable is 1 button from silence to music, and the record cleaning kit knocks down crackle so the bass tightens up. Headed to shows? Grab high-fidelity earplugs. Hands-free at home? Our smart speaker picks let you say, play 70s reggae or classic pop, and you're there. Deal alert. If you use the link in the description, you'll land on our curated picks with current best available Amazon pricing and active discounts where applicable. Prices change, so buy now to lock in today's deal. Tap the link in the description, pick your aisle, grab a favorite, and tell me which category you want me to build next. The Lore Store. Listen better, with gear that gets out of the way and lets the music live. What happens after the frontman who defined your sound is gone? The Doors try to answer that twice, and this second post-Morrison album shows both bravery and drift. Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger take more vocal space, and the band swerves into funk, jazz, and even a playful novelty hit in waiting, The Mosquito. You can admire the risk. They refuse to become a museum of their own organ and darkness past. But the record doesn't cohere. The parts feel like experiments stacked next to each other, rather than a vision pulling forward. A minor chart showing confirms what the ears say. The Doors, as a feeling, were still there, but the identity had slipped out the side door. Do you judge Full Circle on its own terms, as a curious post-gym jam session, or against the myth that made the name impossible to carry? A platinum problem. On the surface, Tormato wins. Top 10 in the UK, big US sales, classic lineup intact. Inside the speakers, fans hear something brittle, compressed sonics, arrangements that feel crowded, the sense of a band caught between stadium expectation and studio indecision. And yet, the songs want to soar. Don't Kill the Whale. Release, Release. The furious bass and drum engine of On the Silent Wings of Freedom. You can feel how close they are to liftoff. You can also feel the weight tied to the plane. The cover joke, a tomato splattered on a Roger Dean photo, became a symbol. World-class players throwing produce at themselves. Call it a misfire with good bones. The kind of record where a different mix and two braver edits might have changed the verdict. If you're the producer for one day, what's your fix? Thin out the layers, push the rhythm section forward, or cut two tracks to let the best ideas breathe? A band that invented heavy metal trying to outrun gravity. By '78, Sabbath had been fighting fatigue, habits, and each other for years. Never Say Die sounds like four great players pulling in slightly different directions. Bright, brisk tempos, cleaner production than their early doom, flashes of old power that don't always lock together. The title track punches with optimism, but the mood underneath is frayed. Junior's eyes aches, a hard road tries to square the circle between toughness and radio shine. On tour, younger bands were nipping at their heels, and the chemistry that once felt unbreakable was now fragile. The misfire isn't that the band forgot how to play, it's that the glue between them was thinning. You can hear an ending, and the need for a reset that would arrive with a new singer the next year. If you had to save one track from this era to play for a newcomer, is it the title cut, or a deeper pick that still carries the old weight? A Dare pressed to vinyl. No drums, no chorus, just layered guitar feedback, overtones, and a locked groove that refuses to stop. At the time, people treated it like a prank or a contract fight. Stores returned it. Some fans felt tricked. But listen with modern ears and you hear something else. A map for noise, drone, and the idea that a rock star could release a piece of sound art without apology. It is not fun in the usual sense. It's endurance, texture, and confrontation, and that is its point. As a rock album, it fails because it rejects the bargain. No songs. As a statement, it's brutally honest about limits, of audience patience, of industry tolerance, of what happens when an artist follows an idea to the edge. Have you ever listened start to finish? If yes, what moment, if any, made you feel calm instead of attacked? Sunlight where fans expected storm clouds. Recorded quickly in the Bahamas. Packaged with a cheery cover that fit the title a little too well, Love Beach arrived as Prog's golden age was fading. Side A reaches for compact pop-leaning songs. Tidy, glossy, controlled.
As soon as I saw them in slacks and white shoes, I threw away the albums and moved on to Pink Floyd.
Side B offers the long-form suite, Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman, trying to keep faith with the band's grand designs. What's missing is the risk and strange beauty that once made ELP feel dangerous. You can hear top-shelf players delivering parts rather than chasing moments.
Well, there's on top of the pops too. I don't know about you, as soon as I saw them in slacks and white
For listeners who met ELP through roaring suites and daring dynamics, this felt like a postcard from a vacation they didn't want to take. The irony, underneath the tan, the craftsmanship remains. You just have to forgive the framing to find it. If you could re-edit Love Beach, would you double down on the long suite? Or strip side A back into something rawer and weirder? A superstar steps onto a dance floor that's already crowded. Victim of Love is Elton's straight-ahead disco record. Sleek tempos, extended grooves, and almost none of the piano personality that defined his 1970s run. It's concise, highly produced, and designed for clubs more than concerts. The problem wasn't just timing, it was identity. The album hides the qualities people came to Elton for: confession, melody curves, that conversational piano voice. Without them, you're left with professional sheen and very little soul connection. In the generous read, it's an experiment that didn't match the singer. In the harsher one, it's a brand stamped on someone else's blueprint. Either way, it's the moment that proves even giants can get lost when they chase a moment instead of shaping it. Imagine this with Elton's piano and a warmer band feel. Would the songs work for you, or is the concept itself the roadblock?
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
The turning point that launched 1,000 jokes and 1,000 parking lot parties. Produced with a cleaner, radio-friendly touch, the album folds disco funk into the dead stew. The elastic title track, I Need a Miracle. New story songs like Stagger Lee, the slow burn of Fire on the Mountain. On release, some fans heard compromise. Too polished, too slick, not enough of the dusty road. But time did its work. Shakedown Street became both a groove and a place, the nickname for the carnival around dead shows, proof that a supposed misfire can become community DNA. The record still divides, studio dead versus live dead, Polish versus sprawl. Yet you can hear the band trying to translate their danceable side to tape, not just their drifts and jams. That impulse, however imperfectly captured, is why the songs lived longer than the reviews. Are you team Studio Sheen, hurts the vibe? Or team, these songs bloom on stage, so the album is a necessary sketchbook? The journey doesn't end here, Rock Warrior. Watch this next.